My name is Jim, and at 67 years old, I finally retired after 4 decades in construction management. I saved every penny to buy my dream beach house in Gulf Shores, Alabama. I imagined peaceful mornings watching the sunrise with coffee in hand. But just 2 weeks after moving in, my son called about his in-laws needing a place to stay for a month. I reluctantly agreed despite my disappointment. Before you hear what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you enjoy stories about standing up for yourself. For 45 years, I poured every ounce of my energy into building a life for my family. Construction management isn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and then some. I started as a regular worker with a tool belt, gradually worked my way up to foreman, then site manager, and eventually operations manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Birmingham. Those years were filled with 12-hour days, weekend emergency calls, and missed family vacations when projects ran behind schedule. My late wife Martha was my rock through it all. She understood the sacrifices we made were for our 3 kids, Thomas, Lisa, and Brian. We wanted them to have opportunities we never did growing up. College education without crushing debt, a helping hand with down payments on their first homes, the kinds of advantages that give young people a fighting chance in today's world. Martha and I had always dreamed of retiring somewhere near the ocean. We would talk about it during rare, quiet moments on our back porch, watching the Alabama sunset and imagining the sound of waves instead. "Just imagine waking up to seagulls instead of alarm clocks," she'd say. But 3 years ago, Martha lost her battle with breast cancer, leaving me to face retirement alone. The first year after she passed, I threw myself into work even harder. My colleagues worried I was pushing myself too hard, but staying busy kept the grief at bay. The second year, I started thinking about what I actually wanted from my remaining years. By the third year, I realized Martha would have wanted me to fulfill our dream, even if she couldn't share it with me. So I started looking for that beach house. Nothing fancy or extravagant, just a modest place where I could hear the ocean and feel close to Martha's memory. I spent weekends driving down to various coastal areas, looking at dozens of properties. Some were too expensive, others too dilapidated, many too far from the water to really feel like a beach home. Then I found it. A small blue cottage in Gulf Shores with the perfect eastward-facing windows to catch the sunrise over the ocean. The real estate agent warned me it needed work, but after 4 decades in construction, that didn't scare me one bit. At $300,000, it stretched my budget, but I knew this was the one Martha would have chosen. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a combined living and dining area, and a small kitchen. What sold me wasn't the inside, though. It was the sprawling wooden deck that wrapped around 2 sides of the house, providing the perfect spot to sit and watch the waves roll in. The previous owners had let it fall into disrepair, but I could already envision how I'd restore it to its former glory. I closed on the house 6 months before my retirement date, spending every weekend driving the 4 hours from Birmingham to Gulf Shores to work on renovations. I replaced rotted deck boards, fixed leaky plumbing, installed new energy-efficient windows, and gave every room a fresh coat of paint. The master bedroom I painted a soft blue that reminded me of Martha's eyes. The guest room became a light sand color, neutral and welcoming. The garage I converted into my personal workshop, with pegboards for my tools, a sturdy workbench, and proper lighting. In the living room, I created a reading nook with a comfortable armchair, positioned to catch both the morning light and the ocean view. I bought a new fishing rod and tackle box, something I'd never had time for during my working years. When retirement day finally came, my coworkers threw a party with a beach theme, complete with a cake shaped like my blue cottage. My boss gave a speech about my dedication, and I was touched by how many people showed up to wish me well. The next day, I packed up my Birmingham house, which had already sold to a young family, and drove to Gulf Shores with my truck loaded with the last of my belongings. Those first 2 weeks of retirement were everything I'd dreamed of. I established simple routines: coffee at sunrise on the deck, a walk along the beach collecting shells Martha would have loved, afternoons spent fishing or working on small projects, evenings reading books I'd put off for years. I met my neighbors, an elderly couple on one side and a young family that visited their vacation home on weekends on the other. For the first time in decades, I answered to no one. No emergency calls. No project deadlines. No client demands. I went to bed when I felt tired and woke up naturally with the sun. I ate when I was hungry, not when a schedule permitted. This freedom, after a lifetime of responsibility, felt like finally taking a full breath after years of shallow breathing. I'd earned this. Every early morning alarm, every missed holiday, every stressful project meeting had been leading to this peaceful retirement. The sacrifices had been worth it. Martha would have loved seeing me so content, finally putting myself first after decades of caring for others. I kept her photo on the bedside table and often found myself talking to her as if she were there beside me, sharing this dream come true. Sunday morning, 3 weeks after moving to Gulf Shores permanently, I was enjoying my coffee on the deck when my phone rang. Seeing Thomas's name on the screen made me smile. At 38, my oldest son had built a successful career as an accountant, married a lovely woman named Amanda 6 years ago, and given me 2 beautiful grandchildren I didn't see nearly enough since they lived in Nashville. "Dad, how's retirement treating you?" Thomas asked after we exchanged greetings. "Couldn't be better," I replied, watching a pelican dive into the waves. "You and the family should come down sometime. The guest room is all ready, and the kids would love the beach." There was a pause before Thomas continued. "Actually, Dad, that's sort of why I'm calling." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. I'd heard that particular voice before, usually when Thomas wanted something difficult. It was the same tone he'd used when he called to ask for help with college tuition after losing his scholarship, or when he needed a loan for his first house that was slightly beyond his budget. "Harold and Dorothy are in a bit of a situation," he continued, referring to his in-laws. I'd met them at the wedding and a few family gatherings since. Harold was a retired bank manager with a superiority complex, and Dorothy was a former high school teacher who never missed an opportunity to offer unsolicited advice. Their house flooded last week when a pipe burst while they were visiting Amanda's sister. The damage is extensive, and their insurance company is dragging its feet about temporary housing costs while repairs are done. I took a sip of my coffee, already sensing where this conversation was heading. "They need a place to stay for about a month," Thomas continued. "Amanda and I would take them in, but with my travel schedule and her working full-time, plus the kids sharing the second bedroom, our place just isn't suitable." "And you thought of my brand new retirement home," I said, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. "Well, you do have that spare bedroom you just mentioned," Thomas said, his voice brightening. "And their family now, Dad. It would just be for a month until their insurance comes through. They're really in a bind." I closed my eyes, feeling the peaceful morning slipping away. "Thomas, I just moved in. I'm still settling." "I know, Dad, but you've always taught us that family helps family. They're good people. They won't be any trouble." His voice took on that persuasive tone he'd perfected since childhood. "It's only for a month, and you have all that space to yourself." Memories flashed through my mind. Missing Thomas's 10th birthday because of a project emergency, but making it up by building him the treehouse he'd always wanted. Working overtime for months to afford his first car. Co-signing his student loans. I'd always put my children first, even when it meant putting my own needs last. "They really don't have anywhere else to go?" I asked, already feeling my resolve weaken. "Dad, I wouldn't ask if there were other options. Amanda's really worried about them, and you know how stressful it is to be displaced from your home." I sighed, thinking of the peaceful mornings I'd been enjoying, the solitude, the freedom to arrange my days exactly as I pleased. All of that would change with house guests, especially ones like Harold and Dorothy. "All right, son," I finally said, the words feeling heavy as they left my mouth. "They can stay for a month. But that's it, Thomas. 1 month. The relief in his voice was immediate. "Thanks, Dad. You're the best. I'll let them know right away. They can probably drive down tomorrow or the day after." Before I could establish any ground rules or expectations, Thomas was already wrapping up the call. "Amanda and the kids send their love. I've got to run, but I'll text you their arrival details. Thanks again, Dad." The line went dead, and I sat staring at the ocean, a knot forming in my stomach. I had a bad feeling about this arrangement, but I'd already given my word. Besides, it was just for a month. I could handle almost anything for 30 days, couldn't I? That afternoon, I found myself rearranging things in the guest bedroom, making space in the closet, clearing a drawer in the bathroom vanity. I moved some of my more valuable possessions, personal items from the common areas to my bedroom. Not that I distrusted Harold and Dorothy exactly, but better safe than sorry. As I worked, resentment bubbled beneath the surface. I'd worked hard for decades to earn this retirement, this peaceful home by the sea. Now, just weeks into enjoying it, I was already sacrificing my comfort for others. Again, I tried to rationalize it away. They were family, in a difficult situation. I had the space. It was temporary. But no matter how I framed it, I couldn't shake the feeling that once again, Jim Williams was putting himself last. That evening, I called Lisa, my daughter who lived in Atlanta. Unlike Thomas, she had always been more perceptive about my feelings. "Dad, you don't have to say yes to everything Thomas asks," she said bluntly after I explained the situation. "They're family." I echoed Thomas's words, though they sounded hollow even to me. "They're Thomas's in-laws, and from what you've told me about them, they're not exactly the house guests from heaven." Lisa had always been direct. "It's okay to protect your boundaries, Dad. Especially now." I appreciated her perspective but felt trapped by my own agreement. "It's just for a month. We'll see," Lisa replied, a note of skepticism in her voice that mirrored my own unspoken concerns. "Just promise me you'll speak up if they overstay their welcome." I promised, though I wondered if I would actually follow through. Standing up for myself had never been my strong suit, especially when it came to family. The next day, I made a trip to the store to stock up on extra groceries and toiletries for my impending guests. As I pushed the cart through the aisles, selecting items I thought Harold and Dorothy might like, I tried to convince myself that maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe we'd become friends. Maybe they'd respect my space and routines. But the knot in my stomach told a different story. It whispered that I'd just given away the peace I'd worked so hard to achieve. Harold and Dorothy Thompson arrived Tuesday afternoon in their silver Lincoln Continental, pulling into my driveway with a honk that seemed unnecessarily loud in the quiet neighborhood. I stepped out onto the porch, forcing a welcoming smile as they emerged from the car. My first surprise came when Harold popped the trunk, revealing not 1 or 2 suitcases, but 5 large ones, plus several shopping bags and what appeared to be Harold's golf clubs. "Jim, good to see you," Harold called out, though he made no move to approach me for a handshake or to start unloading. Instead, he gestured toward the luggage. "Mind giving us a hand with these?" Dorothy was already making her way up the walkway, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the overcast day. "Thomas said you were right on the water, but this is rather quaint, isn't it?" She looked around, her expression suggesting she'd expected something grander. "It suits me," I replied, moving past her to help Harold with the bags. "I didn't realize you'd be bringing so much for just a month's stay." Harold chuckled, finally lifting the lightest of the bags. "Better to have and not need than need and not have, that's my motto." Besides, Dorothy couldn't decide which outfits to bring. It took 3 trips to get all their belongings into the guest room, which suddenly seemed much smaller, with their luggage taking up most of the floor space. Dorothy immediately began unpacking, making comments about the limited closet space and asking if there were more hangers somewhere. "I'll need to rearrange this a bit," she said, already moving the few decorative items I'd placed on the dresser. "Harold needs space for his collection of miniature lighthouses. He gets anxious if they're not displayed properly." By the time I showed them around the rest of the house, Dorothy had made at least 4 comments about the interesting color choices and unique furniture arrangements. Harold seemed most interested in the garage workshop, eyeing my organized tools with what I hoped wasn't covetousness. "This would be perfect for my woodworking projects," he mused, running a hand over my workbench. "I've been meaning to get back into that." I felt a protective surge. "I use it almost daily for my own projects," I said firmly. "But you're welcome to borrow tools if you need them. Just ask first." Harold nodded absently, already picking up one of my chisels and examining it. For dinner that first night, I'd prepared a simple but hearty beef stew, one of my specialties that Martha had always praised. I'd spent the afternoon making it, hoping good food might ease any initial awkwardness. "Is this canned beef?" Dorothy asked after her first spoonful, her nose wrinkling slightly. "No, It's fresh chuck roast from the butcher in town, I replied, my enthusiasm deflating. At home, I always use sirloin and red wine in my stew. Makes all the difference. She took another small bite, then focused more on the bread than the stew I'd labored over. Harold ate heartily enough but commented that it could use more salt, reaching for the shaker before I could respond. Throughout the meal, they compared everything unfavorably to their real home, or how Dorothy usually does things. By dessert, a homemade apple pie, I was already counting the days until their departure. After dinner, while I was washing dishes, I heard furniture being moved in the living room. I dried my hands and walked in to find Dorothy rearranging my carefully positioned chairs and side tables. The flow in here was all wrong, she explained without looking up. This arrangement makes much more sense, don't you think? And tomorrow I'll show you how to properly hang curtains. These are at least 2 inches too high. I opened my mouth to object, then closed it again. It wasn't worth the conflict on their first night. Just please check with me before making changes, I managed to say. I've set things up the way I like them. Dorothy patted my arm condescendingly. Of course, dear. But sometimes a fresh eye sees what's best. The next morning, I woke at my usual 5:30 to catch the sunrise from the deck with my coffee. I was halfway through my first cup when Dorothy appeared in a silk bathrobe, looking irritated. Do you always get up at such an ungodly hour? She demanded. Your footsteps overhead woke us. Harold needs his sleep, you know. His blood pressure. I bit back a retort. I'm sorry if I disturbed you. I'll try to be quieter tomorrow. But inside, I was already chafing at having to tiptoe around my own home. By the end of the first week, a pattern had established itself. Harold had gradually taken over half my workshop, his collections spreading across surfaces I kept clear for my own projects. Dorothy had rearranged not just the living room, but also the kitchen cabinets and linen closet, claiming her system was more sensible. They complained about everything. The water pressure wasn't strong enough. The air conditioning was too cold, then too warm. The internet too slow for Harold's endless sports streaming. They nitpicked my cooking so much that I eventually stopped making meals for them, suggesting they use the kitchen themselves if they preferred. Dorothy took this as an invitation to use every pot and pan I owned, leaving most unwashed to soak. Most infuriatingly, they showed zero appreciation for being housed for free. No offers to contribute to groceries or utilities. No thank you for the clean towels I provided. Not even acknowledgement of the fresh flowers I'd put in their room upon arrival. When I mentioned these frustrations during a phone call with Thomas, his response was dismissive. They're just set in their ways, Dad. Try to be understanding. Their own home is still unlivable, but it's been a week, and they haven't once said thank you. They've rearranged my entire house without asking. That's just Dorothy's way of showing she cares. She likes to make places homey. It was already homey. It was my home. Thomas sighed. Dad, it's just for a few more weeks. Can't you just let it go? For me, once again, I found myself swallowing my true feelings and agreeing to keep the peace. After the call ended, I retreated to my bedroom, the only space Dorothy hadn't managed to improve yet. I felt like a stranger in my own house, tiptoeing around, apologizing for my presence. This wasn't how retirement was supposed to feel. That night, lying in bed, I heard them in the guest room, voices carrying through the walls I now wished were thicker. I don't know why he lives all alone in this big house, Dorothy was saying. It's selfish, really, when you think about it. Well, it's working out for us now, Harold replied. And who knows, maybe their insurance company will take their sweet time. We could stretch this out a bit. I pulled the pillow over my head, trying to block out their voices and the sinking feeling that this 1-month stay was already expanding in their minds. 2 weeks into Harold and Dorothy's stay, I returned from an early morning beach walk to find 3 unfamiliar cars in my driveway. Entering through the back door, I was greeted by the sounds of laughter and conversation from my living room. Harold and Dorothy had invited friends over without even mentioning it to me. Oh, Jim, there you are, Dorothy called out when she spotted me standing in the doorway, sand still clinging to my shoes. Come meet our bridge group. We were just telling them about this charming little cottage you have. 6 strangers sat in my living room, coffee cups on my side tables without coasters, pastry crumbs scattered over the furniture. One elderly man was even examining my prized possession, a model ship I'd spent months building after Martha passed away. Harold and Dorothy have been telling us what a wonderful host you've been, a woman with aggressively dyed red hair said, smiling. So generous to take them in during their time of need. I managed a tight smile, excused myself to clean up, and retreated to my bedroom. When I emerged 30 minutes later, showered and dressed, I found one of the male guests, a bald man named Frank, according to Dorothy's introductions, rummaging through my garage. Harold said you wouldn't mind if I borrowed some fishing gear, he explained, already holding my custom rod that had been a retirement gift from my colleagues. We're heading down to the pier later. Before I could object, he'd loaded my tackle box and net into his car, promising to bring everything back in good condition. I watched helplessly as my carefully maintained equipment disappeared down the driveway in the hands of a stranger. That evening, when the gear was returned, the rod had a broken guide, the reel was missing its handle cap, and my tackle box had been reorganized in a way that made no sense to me, with several of my favorite lures missing. Frank's a bit clumsy, Harold explained with a dismissive wave when I pointed out the damage. But he's a great guy once you get to know him. He's invited us all out on his boat next weekend. You should come along. I declined as politely as I could, then spent an hour in the garage trying to repair my rod. While working, I discovered that Harold had not only taken over half the workspace, but had been using my precision tools without permission. My favorite handmade chisel had a chip in the edge, and my measuring tape had somehow been extended so forcefully that the retraction mechanism was broken. The next day brought a new invasion. Dorothy had taken down several of the family photos I'd hung in the hallway, including my favorite picture of Martha and me on our 30th anniversary. These personal photos make guests uncomfortable, she explained when I confronted her. I've put up some of my watercolor prints instead, much more suitable for a beach house, don't you think? I found my photos stacked in a drawer, Martha's frame scratched. Something inside me cracked a little. Dorothy, please don't touch my personal belongings without asking first, I said, trying to keep my voice level, especially not photos of Martha. She looked surprised at my firmness, then patted my arm. You really should move on, Jim. It's been, 3 years? 4? Surrounding yourself with reminders isn't healthy. I walked away before saying something I'd regret, taking the photos to my bedroom where I carefully rehung Martha's picture on my private wall. That evening, I overheard Harold and Dorothy talking to another set of friends they'd invited for drinks on my deck. Poor old Jim, Dorothy was saying, not realizing I was just inside the open window, rattling around in this house all alone. Doesn't really know how to enjoy retirement. We're showing him how to live a little, Harold added. He should be grateful for the company, to be honest. Before we came, he just sat around staring at the ocean. What kind of life is that? Their friends laughed, and I felt a burn of humiliation and anger. In their eyes, I was just a pathetic old man who needed their intervention, not someone who had earned his peaceful retirement after decades of hard work. 3 days later, I had planned a full-day fishing trip with a guide I'd booked weeks in advance. I was up at 4 a.m, quietly preparing my gear and a small cooler of snacks. At 4:30, just as I was about to leave, my phone rang. It was Dorothy, calling from the guest room. Jim, I need you to run to the store. We're out of cream for coffee, and we're having guests for breakfast at 9. Dorothy, it's 4:30 a.m, and I'm heading out fishing. I've had this trip planned for weeks. Well, I didn't know that, did I? Harold and I can't entertain without proper coffee. Surely your fishing trip can wait an hour. The Hendersons are very important friends. In the end, I called the fishing guide and rescheduled, losing my deposit. I drove to the 24-hour grocery store, purchased cream and the other items Dorothy added to the list when I called her back, and returned home to find both Harold and Dorothy still asleep. Their important breakfast guests didn't arrive until 10, by which time it was too late to salvage my fishing trip. That afternoon, while the Hendersons were still lingering on my deck, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. So how long are you staying with Jim? Mrs. Henderson asked. Harold sighed dramatically. Well, the insurance company is being difficult. They're saying the claim might take another month or 2 to process. Typical corporate runaround. But Jim's been so accommodating, Dorothy added. He has all this space after all. It just makes sense for us to stay until everything's sorted out. I stood frozen in the hallway. Another month or two? They were planning to extend their stay without even discussing it with me first. That night, I had trouble sleeping. My blood pressure elevated enough to give me a throbbing headache. I'd been taking medication for high blood pressure for years, but since retiring, my doctor had reduced my dosage as my readings improved. Now I felt like I needed the full dose again. The next day, I tried calling Thomas several times, but each call went to voicemail. When he finally responded, it was with a brief text. "Sorry, Dad. Crazy busy at work. Everything okay with H&D?" I texted back. "Need to talk about their timeline. Please call when you can." Hours passed with no response. When I tried again the next day, Thomas replied with another deflective text. "They mentioned some insurance delays. Can you hang in there? Amanda's really stressed about her parents." I began to suspect that Thomas knew more than he was letting on. His avoidance was uncharacteristic, and his concern seemed entirely focused on his in-laws' comfort, not mine. After 3 weeks of their presence, I found myself retreating to my bedroom earlier and earlier each evening, avoiding the common areas of my own home where I no longer felt comfortable or welcome. I'd taken to keeping my door locked after finding evidence that someone had been through my closet. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the darkness of my bedroom reflecting on how I'd been treated throughout my life. I'd always been the reliable one, the steady provider, the one who sacrificed his own needs for others. I'd taught my children to be independent and strong, yet somehow I'd never fully embraced those qualities myself when it came to setting boundaries. Martha had been better at that. She would never have allowed this situation to develop, would never have permitted others to steamroll over her home and peace of mind. "You're too nice for your own good, Jim," she used to tell me. "Sometimes you have to put yourself first." As I sat in the dark, I could almost hear her voice urging me to stand up for myself. But decades of peacekeeping habits were hard to break, and the thought of confrontation made my stomach churn. Still, something would have to change. I couldn't continue living as a guest in my own home. The breaking point came exactly 3 weeks after Harold and Dorothy's arrival. I'd gone into town for groceries, returning earlier than expected when the butcher didn't have the cut of meat I wanted. As I approached my house, I decided to enter quietly through the side door near my bedroom, hoping to avoid another of Dorothy's lists of complaints and requests. Passing by the guest room, whose door stood uncharacteristically open, I glanced in and froze. My file box, the one I kept in my closet containing important documents, was open on the bed. Harold stood over it, reading what appeared to be my financial statements, while Dorothy examined the contents of my desk drawer that they'd apparently moved from my bedroom. I watched, unnoticed, as Harold whistled softly. "Would you look at these investment accounts?" The old man sitting on quite a nest egg. Dorothy nodded, rifling through more papers. "And the house is paid off completely. No mortgage at all. He could easily afford to help us buy a new place," Harold continued, "especially with what our insurance will eventually pay out. We could upgrade significantly." Thomas mentioned his father was comfortable, but I had no idea. Dorothy's voice had that calculating tone I'd come to recognize. Maybe we should extend our stay through the holidays, really get to know Jim better. I must have made some sound, because both heads snapped up suddenly. For a moment, we all stared at each other, the violation hanging in the air between us. "Jim, you're back early." Dorothy recovered first, hastily gathering papers. "We were just organizing some things that fell out when we moved the desk for vacuuming." "In my bedroom?" I asked, my voice strange and tight to my own ears. "Well, yes," Harold blustered. "Dorothy is very thorough with her cleaning. We didn't want to disturb you by asking." I said nothing, turning away and walking stiffly to my workshop. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of my workbench, anger and betrayal washing over me in waves. They had invaded my privacy, examined my financial information, and were already plotting how to take advantage of me further. Worse, they clearly felt entitled to do so. In their minds, I was just an old man with resources they deserved more than I did. My decades of hard work, my careful saving and planning, meant nothing to them except opportunity. That evening, tension hung thick over the dinner table. I'd made a simple meal for myself, not bothering to prepare anything for Harold and Dorothy as had become our unspoken arrangement. They'd picked up takeout, spreading it across my dining table with the same entitled carelessness they'd shown toward everything in my home. "Jim," Harold began after several minutes of uncomfortable silence. "Dorothy and I have been talking, and we wanted to discuss our situation with you." I looked up from my barely touched food, waiting. "Our insurance company is being absolutely unreasonable," Dorothy continued. "They're saying it could be another 2 or 3 months before everything is settled and repairs begin on our house. The holidays will be here before we know it," Harold added. "And rather than impose on someone else, we thought it would be simpler for everyone if we just stayed here through Christmas. If that's all right with you, of course." The question seemed like an afterthought. I set down my fork carefully. "Did Thomas know all along that you would need housing for months, not weeks?" The quick glance between them told me everything. "Well," Dorothy hedged, "we might have mentioned to him that these insurance matters can take time. So my son lied to me," I said flatly. "Now, Jim," Harold's tone turned patronizing, "Thomas was just looking out for his in-laws. After all we've done for him and Amanda, supporting them through their early marriage, helping with the down payment on their house. The least his father could do is offer a temporary roof over our heads." Something inside me, something that had been bending and stretching for 3 weeks, finally snapped. "The least I could do," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "I've provided you with free housing, utilities, often food, and considerable patience for 3 weeks. I've had my privacy invaded, my possessions damaged, and my home rearranged without permission. And you speak to me of the least I could do." Dorothy looked startled by my tone. "Jim, we're family. Family helps family. We are not family," I said, standing up. "You are my sons-in-laws, and you have taken advantage of my generosity at every turn. Your stay ends in 1 week, as originally agreed. I suggest you start making alternative arrangements." With that, I left the table, ignoring their protests and Harold's suddenly conciliatory tone. I closed my bedroom door firmly behind me and, for the first time since they arrived, turned the lock. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold rifling through my financial documents, heard Dorothy's calculating voice as they discussed extending their stay. More disturbing was the revelation about Thomas. My own son had misled me, knowing full well his in-laws needed long-term housing. I lay awake until dawn, contemplating not just the immediate situation but my entire relationship with my son and my lifelong pattern of allowing others to take advantage of my accommodating nature. By the time the sun rose, casting golden light through my window, I had reached a decision. No more Mr. Nice Guy. It was time for Jim Williams to stand up for himself. Instead of confronting Harold and Dorothy immediately the next morning, I drove to town and spent an hour sitting in a coffee shop, collecting my thoughts and planning my approach. My initial anger had cooled into something more controlled and purposeful. This wasn't about lashing out. It was about reclaiming my home and my dignity in a way that would ensure lasting change. My first call was to Lisa. Unlike Thomas, my daughter had always been straightforward and practical, traits she'd inherited from Martha. "They did what?" Lisa exclaimed when I told her about finding Harold and Dorothy going through my financial documents. "Dad, that's not just rude. It's a serious violation of privacy." "I know." And when I confronted them, they tried to extend their stay through Christmas. Lisa's exhale was audible through the phone. "This is exactly why I warned you. They're taking advantage of you. And it sounds like Thomas knew it would happen." "I think he did," I admitted. "I need to address this directly with all of them, but I want to be smart about it. No emotional reactions they can dismiss." "Good thinking," Lisa approved. "You need to document everything, set clear boundaries, and be prepared to enforce them, even if Thomas tries to make you feel guilty." After talking with Lisa, I called John Harrington, a retired lawyer who'd become a fishing buddy during my first weeks in Gulf Shores. I explained the situation without emotion, focusing on the facts. "They have no lease, correct?" John asked. "No, just a verbal agreement for a 1-month stay. Then legally, they're guests who can be asked to leave at any time. If they refuse, they become trespassers." John's voice was calm and matter-of-fact. "Document everything from now on. Take photos of the current state of your home. Note any damaged items. and keep a log of any further incidents. If you need to involve authorities, which I doubt it will come to, you'll want that documentation. Armed with this advice, I spent the afternoon putting my plan into action. First, I walked through the house with my phone, photographing each room, noting changes they'd made and damage to my belongings. I captured images of Harold's things spread throughout my workshop and Dorothy's rearrangement of my living spaces. Next, I created a detailed document titled House Rules and Expectations that spelled out proper treatment of my property, privacy boundaries, and a firm end date for their stay exactly 1 week from today. I made 3 copies, one for Harold and Dorothy, one for my records, and one to send to Thomas. I visited my bank and investment firm to place alerts on all my accounts and ensure no changes could be made without additional verification. I also moved some important documents to a safe deposit box, away from prying eyes. Then I booked myself a 2-week fishing trip to the Florida Keys, starting the day after Harold and Dorothy's deadline to leave. The cabin I reserved was small but perfect, situated on a quiet key with excellent fishing opportunities. This would serve dual purposes, giving them no opportunity to extend their stay just a few more days and giving me a well-deserved break after the stress of the past weeks. My next stop was the electronics store, where I purchased a set of security cameras for the common areas of my house. These weren't hidden, the packaging clearly stated their purpose, and I planned to inform Harold and Dorothy of their installation. The cameras would protect both my property during my absence and provide documentation if anything went missing. I also stopped by to see my neighbors, the elderly couple who had become friends during my first weeks in Gulf Shores. I explained that I would be away for 2 weeks and asked if they would keep an eye on my house. I didn't share all the details but mentioned that my sons-in-laws would be moving out before my trip and no one should be at the property during my absence. Back at home, I changed all my passwords for the Wi-Fi and streaming services, created a new guest network with limited hours of operation, and programmed my thermostat to maintain a comfortable but not luxurious temperature. I installed timers on the hot water heater to provide warm but not hot showers for limited durations each day. By evening, I was ready for what I'd come to think of as the family meeting. I sent Thomas a text asking him to be available for a video call at 7, then informed Harold and Dorothy that we needed to speak together with Thomas joining virtually. They seemed wary but agreed, perhaps thinking they could present a united front with my son against me. At 7 sharp, I set up my laptop at the dining table and called Thomas. His face appeared on screen, looking slightly anxious. "Dad, is everything okay? I got your message about needing to talk." "No, Thomas, everything is not okay," I replied calmly. "I've asked you to join this conversation because we need to clarify some things about Harold and Dorothy's stay in my home." I laid out the situation methodically, the original agreement for 1 month of temporary housing, the various boundary violations that had occurred, and finally, the discovery of them going through my financial documents. "I've created a document outlining house rules for their final week here," I continued, sliding a copy across the table to Harold and Dorothy while holding up another copy for Thomas to see on screen. "It includes a firm move-out date next Sunday, which was our original agreement." Dorothy started to protest, but I held up a hand. "I've also taken some precautionary measures. Security cameras are being installed in the common areas tomorrow morning. I've documented the current state of my property, changed my financial access protocols, and informed my neighbors and local friends about the situation." Harold's face had grown increasingly red. "This is completely unnecessary. We're family, for God's sake." "No, Harold, we're not family in the way that would justify your behavior," I replied evenly. "You're my sons-in-laws, and you've been guests in my home. Guests who have damaged my property, invaded my privacy, and plan to extend your stay without my permission." I turned to the screen. "Thomas, did you know from the beginning that your in-laws would need housing for months, not the 1 month you told me?" Thomas's discomfort was obvious. "Dad, their situation is complicated. The insurance company has been difficult." "That's not what I asked. Did you know?" After a long pause, he nodded slightly. "They mentioned it might take longer. And you didn't think I deserved the truth so I could make an informed decision about my own home?" Lisa's face appeared beside Thomas, and I realized she had been there all along, listening. "I told you this would happen, Thomas," she said. her disappointment evident. Dad deserves better than to be manipulated. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have been honest with you. I just knew you'd never turn family away if they needed help, and Amanda was so worried about her parents. I understand wanting to help family, I said, but help should be requested honestly, not manipulated, and it should be received with gratitude and respect, not entitlement. I turned back to Harold and Dorothy. You have 1 week to find alternative accommodations. During that week, you will follow the rules in this document, which include respecting my privacy, not entering my bedroom or workshop without permission, and not inviting guests to my home. If these conditions are not met, I'll have no choice but to ask you to leave immediately. And where exactly are we supposed to go? Dorothy demanded. That's not my problem to solve, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. You've had 3 weeks to work with your insurance company on alternative housing. I suggest you focus your energy there, or on finding a short-term rental. Gulf Shores has many options, especially in the off-season. Harold started to speak, but I continued before he could interrupt. I've booked a fishing trip beginning next Sunday. I will be gone for 2 weeks. My house will be monitored by security cameras and checked regularly by neighbors and friends. No one should be in residence during that time. The message was clear. There would be no opportunity to overstay their deadline. Dad, Thomas began, his voice placating, maybe we can work something out. What if they contribute to expenses? What if they just stay until Thanksgiving? Then we'll find them something else. No, Thomas, I said firmly. The original agreement was 1 month. That month ends next Sunday. I've already been more than generous, especially considering how my generosity has been repaid. For the next hour, I weathered protests, guilt trips, and even tears from Dorothy. Thomas alternated between apologizing to me and trying to negotiate for his in-laws. Through it all, I remained calm but immovable. Lisa, still visible beside Thomas, occasionally interjected with support for my position, reminding everyone that I had a right to peace in my own home. By the end of the conversation, it was clear that my new resolve had shocked them all. Harold and Dorothy retreated to the guest room, whispering furiously. Thomas promised to call me the next day for a private conversation. Before ending the call, Lisa gave me a thumbs up and mouthed, "Proud of you, Dad." As I closed my laptop, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Standing up for myself had been uncomfortable but nowhere near as difficult as I'd feared. More importantly, I realized I should have done it much sooner, not just with Harold and Dorothy, but in many situations throughout my life. The next morning, the security camera installation went smoothly. The technician was professional and quick, setting up devices covering the main entrance, living room, kitchen, and hallway leading to the bedrooms. All would be viewable remotely through an app on my phone. Harold and Dorothy remained coldly civil, speaking to me only when necessary. I noticed them having frequent hushed phone conversations, presumably working on finding new accommodations. Thomas called as promised, and without his in-laws present, he was much more contrite. "I really am sorry, Dad. I should have been straight with you from the start." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "I've always tried to teach you and your siblings the importance of honesty. It hurts to discover my own son thought it was acceptable to mislead me. It wasn't right," he admitted. "I was caught in the middle, trying to please everyone. Amanda was stressed about her parents, and I knew you had the space. I took the easy way out. The easy way for you became the hard way for me," I pointed out. "That's not how families should treat each other." By the time we ended the call, Thomas had promised to help his in-laws find a suitable rental, even offering to contribute to the cost if necessary. He also committed to visiting me properly once things settled down, bringing Amanda and the kids for the family beach vacation I'd originally suggested. The remaining days of Harold and Dorothy's stay passed with minimal interaction. They continued to use the common areas of the house, but were noticeably more careful with my belongings. No more friends were invited over, and I noticed Dorothy had even returned some of my photographs to their original places. The security cameras proved to be an effective deterrent against any further snooping. I caught Harold glancing up at the living room camera more than once, clearly aware he was being monitored. On Saturday, the day before their departure deadline, I returned from a morning walk to find Harold loading suitcases into their car. "We found a monthly rental condo closer to town," he informed me stiffly. "We'll be out by noon. I appreciate that, I replied, matching his formal tone. Dorothy emerged from the house carrying her purse and a small bag. The room is cleaned and the linens are folded, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I nodded, choosing not to mention the various items still damaged or misplaced throughout my home. Their departure without further conflict was worth more than any restitution I might have demanded. By 1 o'clock, they were gone. I walked through my suddenly quiet house, feeling the peace settle back around me like a comfortable blanket. There was work to be done restoring things to my preferred arrangements, but that could wait. For now, I simply wanted to enjoy the return of solitude and autonomy. I took my fishing rod, the one Frank had damaged and I had repaired, and headed to the beach. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders as I cast my line into the rolling surf. With each cast and retrieval, I felt myself unwinding, shedding the tension of the past weeks. The next morning, I loaded my truck with what I needed for my Florida Keys fishing trip. Before leaving, I walked through my house one last time, making sure everything was secure. In the guest room, now stripped back to the simple, peaceful space I had originally created, I found a note propped against the lamp. "Jim," it read in Dorothy's flowing script, "we've found more suitable arrangements. Thank you for your hospitality. Harold and Dorothy." No apology, but I hadn't expected one. I tucked the note into my pocket and locked the door behind me, ready for 2 weeks of well-earned peace. 2 weeks later, I returned to my Gulf Shores home feeling refreshed and centered. The fishing trip had been exactly what I needed, a perfect balance of solitude and casual camaraderie with other fishermen I met at the lodge. I'd caught more redfish and snapper than I could count, spent evenings reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years, and most importantly, hadn't once had to compromise my comfort or peace for someone else's convenience. As I unlocked my front door, I was struck by the welcoming silence. No television blaring Harold's sports channels, no Dorothy rearranging furniture or criticizing my decor choices, just the distant sound of waves and the familiar creaks of my own home settling around me. To my surprise, the house was immaculate, cleaner than when I'd left it, with everything returned to approximately the positions I preferred. On the dining table sat a small gift basket containing local honey, specialty coffee, and a card. I opened it cautiously. "Dad," read Thomas's handwriting. "Lisa and I came down to help clean up after Harold and Dorothy left. We wanted to make sure you came home to a peaceful house. I'm truly sorry for putting you in that difficult position. Call when you're back. Love, Thomas." Beneath his signature was a note in Lisa's more angular script. "Proud of you for standing up for yourself, Dad. About time. Love you." I smiled, setting the card aside and beginning to unpack. Later that evening, I called Thomas as requested. His voice sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me. "Dad, how was the fishing trip?" "Exactly what I needed," I replied honestly. "Thank you for the gift basket and for cleaning up. That was thoughtful." "Least we could do," Thomas said. "Lisa really laid into me after that video call. Made me realize how unfair I'd been to you." "How are Harold and Dorothy settling into their rental?" I asked, curious but no longer invested in their situation. "Actually, they found something more permanent," Thomas said. "Their insurance finally came through, and instead of repairing the old house, they decided to buy a new condo. Turns out the flood damage was worse than initially thought. I wondered briefly if there had ever been significant flood damage at all, or if that had been part of their manipulation from the beginning. But it didn't matter now. They were out of my house and, hopefully, would think twice before taking advantage of someone else's generosity." "Dad," Thomas continued, sounding hesitant, "I really am sorry. I should have been straight with you from the start. It wasn't fair to put you in that position." "No, it wasn't," I agreed, no longer feeling the need to soften the truth. "I've always tried to be there for you kids, but that doesn't mean it's okay to take advantage of that. I know. Lisa helped me see that my whole relationship with you has been, well, kind of one-sided. You give, I take. I want to do better." The admission surprised and touched me. "I appreciate that, son." We talked a while longer, making tentative plans for him to bring Amanda and the kids down for a proper visit in the spring. By the time we hung up, I felt a new equilibrium forming in our relationship, one with more mutual respect than before. Over the next few weeks, I set about truly reclaiming my home. I made several changes to protect my newfound boundaries. I consulted with John, my lawyer friend, who helped me draft a simple legal document specifying that any future guests could stay for no more than 7 consecutive days without a formal rental agreement. I kept a copy in my files and sent one to each of my children, making it clear that while I loved hosting family, I was establishing firm parameters. I installed a small safe in my closet for important documents and valuables, ensuring that no future guests could snoop through my private papers. I also maintained the security cameras, appreciating the peace of mind they provided. But the changes weren't all defensive. I hosted a proper housewarming party for my neighbors and the new friends I'd made in Gulf Shores. We grilled seafood on the deck, shared stories and laughter, and I gave a full tour of my home, proudly showing off the workshop and reading nook that represented my retirement dreams. One evening, about a month after returning from my fishing trip, I received a call from Lisa. "How's life by the sea, Dad?" she asked. "Better than ever," I replied truthfully. "I'm hosting a neighborhood poker game tomorrow night, if you can believe that." Lisa laughed. "Look at you, social butterfly." "That's great, Dad." We chatted about her work and kids for a while before she turned serious. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened with Harold and Dorothy. It wasn't just about them being terrible house guests." "No?" I prompted. "No. It was about a pattern in your life, Dad. You've always put everyone else first, often at your own expense. Mom used to worry about it. She told me once that her biggest concern was that after she was gone, you'd keep giving and giving until there was nothing left for yourself." I swallowed hard, hearing Martha's wisdom echoing through our daughter. She was right to worry. "It's been my pattern for a long time. But you broke it," Lisa said firmly. "You finally stood up for yourself, and that's huge. I want you to know how proud I am, and how proud Mom would be." After we hung up, I took my evening coffee out to the deck and sat watching the stars emerge over the ocean. Lisa was right. Throughout my life, I'd been the reliable one, the steady provider, the one who sacrificed his own needs for others. It had become so ingrained that I hardly questioned it anymore. The incident with Harold and Dorothy had forced me to confront that pattern and actively choose a different path. It hadn't been easy, but the rewards were immeasurable. I now had genuine peace. Not just the absence of work obligations, but true inner tranquility that came from honoring my own needs and boundaries. Over the following months, my relationship with Thomas gradually healed and evolved. True to his word, he brought his family down for a spring visit, and I got to enjoy being a grandfather without the pressure of hosting difficult in-laws. Thomas was noticeably more considerate, calling ahead to discuss visit details rather than presenting them as fate's accomplice, and expressing genuine gratitude for my time and hospitality. I developed new friendships in the Gulf Shores community, joining a local fishing club and volunteering at the Marine Conservation Center. These connections were different from my working relationships. They were balanced, mutual, chosen rather than obligatory. One year after the Harold and Dorothy incident, I hosted a small gathering to celebrate my retirement anniversary. Lisa and her family came, as did Thomas, Amanda, and the kids. Harold and Dorothy were notably absent, which suited everyone fine. We grilled on the deck, played in the surf, and enjoyed each other's company without tension or ulterior motives. That evening, as everyone relaxed in the living room, Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To Dad," he said, "who taught us the importance of family, hard work, and most recently he smiled self-deprecatingly that standing up for yourself doesn't mean you love others any less. Thanks for that lesson, Dad. I hope I'm passing it on to my own kids." Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the deck, listening to the rhythmic sound of waves meeting shore. The moon cast a silver path across the water, reminding me of the journey I'd traveled this past year. Sometimes, the most valuable gift we can give ourselves is the courage to say no to others and yes to our own well-being. It took me 67 years and an uncomfortable confrontation to learn that lesson, but better late than never. As I watch the waves now, I realize the most beautiful view isn't what's outside my window, it's being able to finally look in the mirror and respect the man looking back. Martha would be proud. I certainly am. So what about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family members taking advantage of your kindness? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support means the world to me, and I'll be back next week with another story from my life. Until then, remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. Take care of yourselves, friends.